Beaver builds Canadian Pacific Railway. But the railway sucks, as the tracks are bumpy due to gaps. Beaver wants to fix this, but his repairs cause problems. Beaver needs a special fix. Beaver needs thermite welding.
Holy shit!
What is thermite welding? Wait, what even is thermite? Thermite was first discovered in 1893 by a German chemist named Hans Goldschmidt as a way to produce pure metals. Thermite is a combination of metal powder and metal oxide. When ignited in just the right way, an exothermic reaction occurs, reaching temperatures of over 2,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to cut through nearly any barrier known to man, making it useful for applications like military. Thermite can be used for incendiary weaponry, used as far back as the Great War. More recently, thermite has been seen in the Russia-Ukraine war on weapons called dragon drones that destroy vehicles, forests, and even beavers. Wait, what?
Hey, okay.
Cutting. Thermite can cut through very thick metals, making it useful for jobs like shipbreaking, industrial decommissioning, and railroad maintenance. Thermite cutting can also be used for building demolition. Welding. Thermite welding is mainly used on rail tracks for trains, cranes, mining carts, and even industrial mills, as removing the gaps lessens wheel fatigue and increases track durability, lowering maintenance costs. In fact, the first ever use of thermite welding was to weld tram tracks together, providing more comfort for passengers. Thermite welding can also be used for emergency repairs, heavy machinery, and even electrical work, like antennas and power grids. To this day, the thermite welding process has stayed practically the same. But how does it work? Process procedure and equipment. Before we start, the proper thermite must be selected. Thermite powder has many different combinations. In the case of railroad welding, the basic combination is iron oxide powder with aluminum powder, mixed with other alloying additives like carbon and manganese, matching it to the track steel. Now, with the selected thermite, we can begin welding. Hey, you forgot about... Oh yeah. To even begin welding, the train tracks must be at a neutral temperature, at which they have no stress, as cold temperatures contract metals and hot weather expands them. Simple thermal expansion, eh? To achieve this, welding must be done under specific conditions. In the case of a Canadian winter, welding must be done at the warmest time of day to minimize rail stress. Once the temperature is achieved, the job can finally start. Cutting. To start off, a gap must be created to give enough room for welding. Usually, the width is about 2.5 centimeters, or about 1 inch for you American beavers, and it is cut with a circular saw or blowtorch. If the cuts aren't straight, you're fired. Alignment. The tracks must be perfectly aligned to produce a seamless weld. To achieve this, the rails are angled slightly upwards, counteracting the forces from the liquid thermite. When the liquid starts to cool, the contracting forces, specifically at the top of the weld, will naturally bend the rail perfectly flat. But to do that, you must align the rails correctly by using wedges, track spikes, and even specially engineered rail alignment tools to help fit up the tracks, specifically at the head of the rail, horizontally and vertically, and at the foot of the rail, horizontally and vertically. Damn it, I messed it up. That's close enough. Clamping device. The clamping device is then installed. The device is positioned by a gap gauge and holds the molds, and the preheating torch. During this step, the preheating torch is aligned in the center of the gap so that both sides become equally heated. The torch will be used later. Sealing. The liquid metal must be contained for it to form a weld. To do this, refractory molds are used, as they can withstand the heat and never leak, unless you forget to securely clamp them. But who would be dumb enough to do that, right? What the hell? The molds are placed within metal mold shoes, allowing them to be clamped by the clamping device and aligned. Also, within the assembly is a special mold piece called a plug. This piece is very important and removable to allow preheating, then welding. Once the molds are set, refractory sand, known as luting sand, is packed in to ensure absolutely no gaps. Slag pens are also installed on both sides of the assembly and underneath to collect excess weld metal. Preheating. To begin preheating, the plug mold is removed, and the torch is set on the clamping device. Preheating typically lasts between 3 and 7 minutes, depending on the rail width and neutral temperature. While we wait for that, I'll explain its importance. First, preheating eliminates any moisture and volatiles in the weld. This is very important for safety with thermite, as water and thermite don't mix. I'll talk more about that later. Second, it makes both rail ends very hot, allowing the molten metal to cool slowly and bond correctly. Without preheating, the weld will cool rapidly, as the heat gets drawn away, since the temperature of the tracks is colder than the weld. This effect directly ties to thermal conductivity, creating problems like brittle cracking in the heat-affected zone, as the rapid cooling traps the carbon grains, forming a needle-like microstructure called martensite, which is extremely hard but very brittle. If a heavy weight, like a train, were to roll across it, scientifically, it would break in a brittle manner, which means, in my terms, it instantly fails under pressure, like you talking to a girl. Anyways, the preheat is done. Now, to the thermite container, also known as a crucible, is then set and ignited by a magnesium ribbon, causing a chemical reaction where the steel oxygen atoms switch places with the aluminum, as aluminum is more reactive and forms stronger bonds with oxygen. When these bonds form, they release a great deal of heat, hot enough to melt the two metals, forming pure molten steel and pure aluminum oxide. This chemical reaction is also known as an alumothermic reaction. As it continues, the metals will begin to separate. The liquid steel will naturally sink to the bottom due to its higher density, whereas the liquid aluminum has a lighter density, so it will begin to rise. The molten thermite will eventually melt through the crucible. When this happens, the steel will pour into the mold first and fill the bottom. Then, the aluminum will enter next and float on top of the steel, causing it to flow into the slag pens. As the molten metal begins to cool, Beaver engineers carefully monitor the cooling time. If cooled too much, the mold and excess slag will harden and become very difficult to remove. If cooled too little, the metal is soft and can be damaged during cleanup. After the cooling time has passed, the slag pens, mold shoes, and clamping device are removed. The molds are then broken off with a hammer to reveal the weld. The excess weld is then sheared off using a shear press and ground to a flat finish. If too much, derailment. If too little, derailment. With that done, admire it. Emote on it. Advantages. Thermite welding has several advantages. One of its key takeaways is that it doesn't require electricity, making it very useful for remote locations in the forest. Thermite also produces very strong bonds, as the extreme temperatures fuse the weld metal and base metal with a complete metallurgical bond, making it very useful for certain jobs. Thermite welding is also very simple to use. Don't try this at home and don't sue me, please, as it has a quick setup time and low maintenance cost. But still, thermite welding has its limitations. One of thermite's biggest issues is that you can't control the heat. Once it ignites, you can't stop it, as it doesn't rely on air to breathe. So whatever happens, you're stuck along for the ride, resulting in weld quality being hit or miss. Second, thermite and moisture can cause problems, as any water touching the molten thermite can instantly flash into steam, causing a steam explosion, which is extremely dangerous for beavers and their wooden houses.
You burned my house to the ground! My family's dead! What do I do? I'm gonna find you, motherfucker. I'm gonna
Closing remarks. Thermite is an exothermic reaction used for a variety of different jobs. By carefully combining certain metal powders, you can produce an incredibly powerful reaction, capable of melting most metals and making a really big hole. But with all that power comes great responsibility. Using thermite requires proper training and safety to avoid its dangers, but despite that, thermite can be surprisingly easy as long as you follow the steps and stay on track. Please subscribe.